How is it possible for our clients in our case study today to retire at 60 with no forms of income? The only stream of income that they have in the pipeline is Social Security, and yet they end up with nearly $6.5 million at the end of their retirement plan. Well, I'm not only going to show you how this happens, but we're going to talk about why this is actually a consistent issue that I've run into during my career and some ways that you can plan around it. And I get that this is a mind-blowing concept to a lot of people because statistics show time and time again that the number one fear for retirees is, you guessed it, running out of money. So let's start with a health and retirement study from 2001 to 2015. What you're looking at here is retiree spending after the age of 65. And what the study shows is that the inflation-adjusted total household spending actually falls by about 2% annually after the age of 65 for all retirees. This figure is higher for high net worth households as it jumps up to 2.7%. And even for the bottom 20% of households by net worth, there's still a decrease annually of 0.3%. And that's important to be aware of because whether you have $2 million saved up, like in our case study today, or maybe you're someone with maybe only $300,000 saved up, chances are you're spending less after 65. And there's multiple reasons as to why the data is showing this, but perhaps the most likely is that it shows us that once Social Security starts coming in, rather than someone continuing to draw, let's say 4% off their portfolio and increase their spending since they have Social Security coming in, they instead do the opposite. Data suggests folks have Social Security come in and they actually reduce their spending to match that income. And let me tell you, as a retirement planner, I've seen people do this with literally $5-10 million in savings. They refuse to take money out because they're used to budgeting off of fixed income, and that's just what they do. Once that Social Security comes in, they cut spending just to match that. It happens all the time. So the net result is you get people that live exclusively off Social Security and they're not touching their portfolio, and if they're investing even somewhat okay, that portfolio is steadily growing and growing and growing over time rather than being drawn down. The second piece of data that shows why it can be easy to underspend in retirement is the fact that modern day retirement software is built around something called a Monte Carlo analysis. A Monte Carlo analysis is just a fancy way of stress testing your retirement plan. Instead of assuming you'll get the same return every single year, the software runs thousands of simulations using random sequences of good and bad years in the market. It then takes all these simulations and they are tested against your specific retirement circumstances, like the income and types of savings you have, as well as your monthly spend rate. The result is a probability score, like saying you have a 90% chance your money will last until 95. Now, these simulations can be a nice way to provide supplemental testing to retirement plan, but here's the catch. These simulations are often too conservative. There was an entire Kitsis.com study done on this very topic with all the nitty-gritty details, which I'll link in the description of this video. But a couple big takeaways are, for example, 6.5% of Monte Carlo scenarios are worse than even the worst case historical scenario has ever been. In addition to that, 50% to 82% of Monte Carlo scenarios were worse than any actual historically bad sequence has ever been, and they'll use these often lower projected returns. And don't get me wrong, a Monte Carlo analysis is a nice secondary way to stress test a retirement plan. I mean, we still use them at Modern Wealth. The problem is they are the star of the show everywhere. So if you're using Schwab, Fidelity, Vanguard, a random free retirement planning tool on a 401k's website, whatever it is likely using a Monte Carlo based retirement plan which can be way too conservative and lead you to underspend. So before we dive into this case study today, showing how this happens, let's just recap the data. Studies show that people start actually decreasing their spending after 65. And then if someone goes to get a retirement plan done, whether with a professional or with a free online tool, it is likely being too conservative, and that leads to further underspending. So let's dive into our case study today and the big details you need to know about. So we're working with Joe and Jill. They're retired at 60, and they have about $1 million in a 401k, $500k in a brokerage account, and they own their home outright with no mortgage. They are spending $7,000 a month in their retirement. We're also going to assume 3% inflation throughout the plan, as well as a 6.4% annual return on their balanced investment portfolio. We're also going to assume they both get a full retirement age Social Security benefit of $3,200 and that they're both going to live until 95. So let's see what this all looks like in practice here. So you can see here that they are, again, 60. They have their retirement portfolio. And you can see here that the portfolio, even though that they're pulling from it, they don't have Social Security coming in yet, it's still steadily growing. It's not growing a ton, but it's kind of flat, right? So you can see that happening from 60 all the way to 67. They've actually grown the portfolio about $100,000. They've drawn down all the non-pre-tax money, which again, if we're trying to optimize, perhaps we pull from the pre-tax money instead or do Roth conversions, right? But that's beyond the scope of this video. They get to 67, and then from here, they're taking Social Security. Now, when we fast forward and we see what happens over time, they're not relying on their portfolio anymore. They could, right? They could theoretically spend more, right? But they don't. Instead, they're still sticking to that $7,000 a month monthly budget that they set out for themselves. And Social Security is by and large covering the bill. And so what ends up happening is that portfolio really starts to grow over time now. We fast forward all the way to the end of their plan, and they have $6.4 million left over as an inheritance to their kids, family, whoever it is. And again, I know that this seems like monopoly money. I know to a lot of people it might, but the reality is that this is a common issue. This happens all the time where folks will be too conservative with their spending, and then the portfolio actually starts to grow once they start to grow their balance sheet. So now that you've seen this scenario play out, how would you feel if this was your retirement plan? Would you regret not traveling and spending more while you were younger? Would you regret not spending more time with your friends and family? Would you regret not being more charitably inclined? Heck, would you regret not retiring sooner? This is exactly why a guardrails-based income approach is the primary method for how we build retirement plans for clients. With a guardrails approach, they could spend $9,227 a month and have a sustainable retirement plan. So right out of the gate, we know that $7,000 a month is too conservative. But perhaps more importantly, we have a plan to adjust their income if their portfolio grows. So in our case here, if the portfolio balance reaches $1,654,000, then we can adjust income upwards to $10,178. And even if there's a big market sell-off and the portfolio takes a hit, we have a game plan to temporarily dial back their spending. So there you have it, guys. If you want a retirement plan that gives you more flexibility, the freedom to spend more, and even the potential to retire sooner, reach out to us at www.modernwealth.com where you can get a free retirement assessment done using that exact guardrails approach. I hope you learned a thing or two, and I will see you next time.